you cannot believe the beauty and the meaning he pulled out of Parshat Tazria. It was incredible. It was such a thoughtful, high-level, erudite. You could, when the first time he delivered the draft to me, I'm like, what Bible professor wrote this for you? It was so interestingly done. And he talked about how he was choosing his Torah, his Parsha, during the pandemic. And he was drawn to Tazria because he was drawn to the notion of quarantine in an era of sickness. And he just wove something really beautiful out of it. It's really cool. Okay, everyone have a sheet? Who needs a sheet? Okay. Parshat Metzora, the second half of what is often a feared double parsha, feared in terms of what to teach from it, feared that these are actually hard parashot to read because you have a lot of verses that begin with the same words but different trup. I find it a very complex parsha to read. By the time we get to Parshat Metzora, it's really Parshat Tazria, which is about the disease Tzara'at. Parshat Tazria begins with a few verses about childbirth, the obligation to circumcise your son in 8 days, and then the rules of Tzara'at. Parshat Metzora, which is named for Tzara'at, the Metzora is the one who has it, is really about mostly recovering from it, right? The disease is over by the time we get to this Parsha, which is going to be significant for one of the commentaries we're going to read. So I want to read together these first three verses, which are the second, third, and fourth verses of the Parsha. The first verse is the standard Vayidaber Adonai al Moshe Lemor. Okay? I'm just going to read it slow, and we'll see what comes out of the verses themselves and look at some commentary. Zot tieh Torah Metzora. This will be the Torah of the Metzora. When the Torah uses the word Torah, it doesn't mean Torah. When the Torah uses the word Torah, what does it mean? Instruction, right? It's the word Torah is from the verb lehorot, to instruct, like moreh, teacher, right? So when the Torah uses the word Torah, it doesn't mean the 5 books of Moses. It means the laws of, the instruction of. This shall be the instruction of, the laws of the Metzora, the one who has tzara'at, this skin disease. Biyom taharato, on the day that he becomes, it's translated here as purified. If you've studied with me in the past, you know that I resent the translation of tahor into pure and tameh into impure because it suggests positive, negative. You can't use the English words pure and impure and not have it be one good, one bad. It's not at all clear that the biblical use of tahor and tameh is bad, good, but they're different states of being that we're sometimes in, right? And tameh is a state of life ebbing. You're tameh when you're in the presence of death, a corpse. You're tameh when you're oozing from generative parts of your body, because that's a scary thing, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a scary thing. And tahor is when you come through living waters. So it's translated as purified, but basically the day on the recovery from the tzara'at. Vehuva el ha-kohen. He is brought to the kohen. Okay? Anything jump out to anyone about that verse? On its own? Anything, questions, comments? Okay. Next verse. V'yatza ha-kohen, the kohen will leave el michutz lamachaneh, leave to outside the encampment. Why does the priest have to go outside the encampment? That's where he was. The Metzora was quarantined outside the camp. So it's an interesting contrast. V'huva el ha-kohen, he's brought to the kohen. You would think if the verse ended there, that in order to be checked out to see if he's ready to come back, he's brought to where the Kohen is, but then the next verse is the Kohen goes out. So it's hard to make sense of what the Huva is. Remember that as well, okay? Because if we are to read Huva al Kohen, that's the passive voice, that he's brought to where the Kohen is, why is the Kohen leaving? Okay, a commentator we're going to read is going to pick up on that. Vera'aho Kohen, the Kohen will look, V'hinei, behold, nirpa nagatzara'at min hatzarua. The affliction of tzara'at will have been healed. Nirpa, you hear the word rofeh, doctor. This is the passive of the verb heal. It looks like, or it's really a subjunctive. If it's the case that it looks that when he sees the guy, I guess, or the woman, and the plague of tzara'at has been healed from the one who had it, then verse 3, V'tzivah HaKohen, the Kohen will make a commandment, right? The Kohen here serves as priest, doctor, right? Because this is thought of as spiritual medical condition, and they didn't really have doctors back then anyway. So, that was a common thing, that you went to the place of worship for both your physical healing and your spiritual healing. So he makes a diagnosis, or he makes a determination that the person is healed, and he makes this command, "Velakach lamitaher," that it's the grammar of the lakach is "and he will take," but who the subject of the he will take is unclear. It's not necessarily the Kohen, even though it seems like it is. Something like he makes a commandment that someone take, lamitaher, to the person who is in the process of being purified, even though I hate that English word. Shtei tziporim chayot torot, 2 live, pure birds. What does pure birds mean in this situation? I'm not sure. In Parshat Shmini, kosher, right? Like pure in the sense that that they could be eaten, right? There has to be a bird that would be edible. The eitz erez, some cedar wood. Ushni tolaat, the scarlet of the worm, some kind of a red dye. Ve'ezov, hyssop, or if you like the bread sold in the old city of Jerusalem, zatar, right? So zatar, which is the Arab word for ezov, which we say is hyssop, okay? The verses go on, but that's the basic thing, right? This is what happens on the day that he's to leave the tzarat. The Kohen examines him. Where it happens is interesting. He sees that, your affliction is over. He makes his command that he should bring 2 live birds, cedar wood, crimson dye, and hyssop, okay? Anything on those verses themselves? We'll look at the commentary. Okay. Look at Rashi on the last verse. This is source number 2, and hopefully those who are on Zoom, you have the source sheet in front of you, so it's source number 2. Ushni tolaat ve'ezov. On the fact that what the tsarua, the one who has tzarad, brings, is this red scarlet and hyssop, Rashi says something typically brief and concise, that he is summarizing or synopsizing from a longer midrash that we're going to read below. And what does it say? Mata kanato v'yitrapeh. What is the remedy that the person in this situation should experience such that the person will be on the way to refuah, to healing? Excuse me. Yashpil atzmo. He should lower himself. Miga'avato, from his pride. Kitolaat uche'ezov, like a worm and like hyssop. Right? So Rashi says, it's a little strange that the thing that this, or maybe it's a little strange. What's the specificity of the things that the person who's coming back from tzara'at has to bring? Why something that emerges from a worm, and why something that comes from a low bush, ezov? And Rashi says it is a metaphor, that you're not just healing from a skin rash, you're healing from a soul rash, you're healing from a personality trait that brought this upon you, and the way that you get back to your old life is through things that represent the very sinfulness that brought you there, aloneness, right? Or the opposite of the sinfulness that brought you there. Rashi is making a much more concise version of several midrashim. One of them is source 3. Okay, so sometimes I like reading Rashi on his own, and sometimes I like reading the source from which he brought it. Rashi, for those of you in my Rashi class know this, Rashi knows all of Midrash and Talmud by heart. I mean, quite literally. There's no Safaria, there's no hyperlink, there's no apps. And when he gets to this verse, he just knows all of the rabbinic material, and he somehow like collapses it into one sentence. But the original was much broader. So this is Midrash Tanchuma, one of the midrashic collections that comment on Vayikra. Okay, on the phrase B'yom Taharato, that's the opening verse that we read, on the day that he becomes tahor. Kama, with what? Kama in modern Hebrew means how much, in rabbinic Hebrew means like how so. Kama, like what? Shtei tziporim chayot torot. 2 live, pure / kosher birds. the next two words should be familiar to you. Ma nishtana, right? The reason why it's good to hear that is that we think of Ma nishtana as like unique liturgy because it appears in the Haggadah. That was just the rabbi's way of saying how is X different from Y, right? And originally Ma nishtana appears in the Mishnah of Psachim, the 10th chapter of Psachim that deals with the Haggadah, or deals with the laws of Pesach, that became the Haggadah. So we think it's something unique. You look at rabbinic material and you see Ma nishtana all the time because the rabbi saying, how is this different, right? Ma nishtana korbanot mishar korbanot. How or why, and I think he's saying at the same time, how or why is this sacrifice different than all other sacrifice? And why the hyssop, and why the 2 live birds, and why the cedar, and why the crimson? Al shesiper lashon hara. The reason why his korban is different is because the reason why he got this disease, according to rabbinic interpretation, is that he spoke lashon hara, he had an evil tongue, and so what happened to him is what he caused to happen to someone else to make them feel embarrassed and on the outs. Lefichach amara katuv. Therefore, the verse said, "Yehei korbano shtei tziporim." So he's going to see each element of of what's in the sacrificial recipe related to the sin that he's coming from. It's Yehei korbano shtei tziporim, 2 birds, shekulan molichot, whose voices go, whose voices bring. Now the Midrash is a bit vague here, so it's up for us to figure it out. What is he trying to say, the author of the Midrash, about birds whose voices carry or whose voices go, such that that's related to the sin that this person is recovering from? Yeah, I think so. What Bobby said, I realized that there's no microphone on the table, so let me put one microphone on the table. Actually, why don't you just say it again?
It seems like it's a bit of a metaphor for when one is speaking and what they say may carry beyond that domain if it's through one person or several people. And so the metaphor of the bird singing, that it can extend and have ripple effects beyond.
Yeah, I think so. And we don't know for sure because he just uses 2 words, kolan molichot, its voice to go on. But I don't know, birds chatter can be heard quite a while. I'm thinking of, it's not the exact same thing, but anyone read the Hunger Games books, right? The jabberjays, right? That they can, sometimes it feels that there are many more birds than there are. So there are times when I'm a very peaceful man. I love animals, that I would like to annihilate the crows outside my window at 5:30 in the morning because it seems like they can't be contained, right? And they're louder than they should be, and they just keep going and going, and the spread cannot be brought back, right? So, what's that? Reverberations, right? So maybe that's what's saying here. You, in your lashon hara, were chattering like a bird, and you were thinking that it was just sweet sounds, but it was actually spreading and doing damage. Therefore, you have to bring such 2 birds. Sorry for the birds that they get implicated in this as part of your recovery. The 8 erez, the tree of the cedar tree. Ha'erez hazeh ein gavoa mimeno. We know no trees bigger than it. They had never seen a sequoia, right? So in the Middle East, right, a cedar tree, the Arzei Levanon, right? We have that reference in the book of Psalms that if God is able to smash the cedars of Lebanon, then that's a suggestion of tremendous power. We know no tree bigger than a cedar tree. Ulefisha higbia atzmo ke'erez, because the person who is speaking lashon hara made himself or herself out to be as big as a cedar tree. Look how big I am. Look how small you are. Look how powerful I am. Look how whimsically I could just put you down. Right? Ba'a alav hatzarat. That's why the tzara'at came to him. Parentheses. You have a parentheses in the middle of this where you have a davar acher, another matter, another idea. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, Al gasut haruach hatzara'at ba'a. It's that you don't necessarily get tzara'at for lashon hara, but for being haughty. How do we know this? Shekain at motzeh b'uziyahu ketiv. You know this regarding the biblical character from earlier on and in the book of Chronicles of Uzziyahu, it says, Ukechezkato gavoa libo ad lahashchit, that he was, when he got strong in his chozek, gaba libo, his heart got big, ad lahashchit, up until a destructive level, right? He became very holier than thou. That's in chapter 26, verse 16, and then 3 verses later in verse 19, Uchtiv uvezapo im hakawanim, he got so arrogant with the Kohanim in his generation, that tzara'at zachab bitzcho. He had blazing tzara'at coming off his forehead. End parentheses, right, back to the regularly scheduled programming, but this idea that you may not only get tzara'at for lashon hara, you might get tzara'at for haughtiness. Ha'ezov, hyssop, on the other hand, is the exact opposite of cedar. Ha'ezov hazeh ein ba'ilanot shafel mimeno. When it comes to hyssop, we know no trees or bushes that are lower than it. I don't think I've ever seen a hyssop bush in the wild, but I imagine it's a low plant. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been making this comparison. But you can understand, it's kind of like an herb, and herbs grow low. So your recipe for recovery from sara'at are the birds that represent the way you got into this, the cedar trees that suggest your frame of mind, that suggest you're bigger than everyone else, the ezov, which is lower. Why? Because you thought you were big, but you're actually lowering yourself, right? It came from haughtiness, but it produced the opposite of haughtiness. Anyone who'd act that way is really a low person. Lefichach mitrapeh al yedei ha'ezov. Therefore, you become healed by means of the hyssop. V'shachat et hatzipor achat. So this is now back to the verse a verse that we didn't read, that you slaughter one of the birds. Lama shochet achat u'mishaleach achat. I'm going to give you a heads up that I'm not 100% sure what the Midrash is doing here, but I figured I would bring the whole Midrash and you can help me understand it. The Torah says that two birds come and you slaughter one and you dispatch the other. Why do you not slaughter both the ones that you brought? Ela im asat shuva. In case you did shuva, ein hatzara'at choser alav, then the tzara'at will not come back to you. The only thing I can think of there, and I don't know if I'm right, is that you bring two you really owe two birds for this. But if your shuva, if your repentance is complete, is sincere, the idea is that you slaughter one for your sacrifice and you let the other one go as a way of saying you didn't need the full double sacrifice because you actually done repentance from what you did wrong. I may be missing the illusion there. If someone has a better explanation, I'm open to hearing it. Use the microphone, Larry.
Is it possibly connected to the concept of the scapegoat? And
It's similar imagery. I just don't know how to map it out, right? So in the scapegoat, right, one is slaughtered, and the one that's sent away is carrying the sins of the people. So it's similar imagery, but I'm not sure that the meaning is the same. And the Midrash is a little bit, again, it's vague, it's hard to know. Now, remember we said before that the phrase V'huva el HaKohen, he's brought to the Kohen, is interesting because the previous verse says that the Kohen goes to him. Right, sorry, the other way around. He's brought to the Kohen, and then the next verse says that the Kohen comes to him. And so the Midrash picks up on the oddness of V'huva el HaKohen. If the Kohen is coming to him, then in what way is he brought to the Kohen? Mahu V'huva el HaKohen. What does it mean, V'huva el HaKohen? What the Midrash is about to do is anti-intellectual, but totally fair game in the world of Midrash. It's taking a word that they know what it means, and they say it doesn't mean that. And we're going to make it mean something that it sounds like. Huva, don't read it as passive, he will be brought, but huva, he is the one who comes. Not that he is brought, but he comes. The author of this Midrash knows it doesn't mean that, but it also knows that the verb is strange because of this idea that the Kohen is the one going to him. Huva, he is the one who has to come. Lama, shahakol rechokim uvdelim mimenu. Because of what he did, everyone is far away and separated from him. Shekain David Omer, just like this, King David said in the book of Psalms, O havai v're'ai mineged nig'i, my friends and my compatriots are apart from me in my affliction. Ya'amodu ukrovai mirachok amadu. And they stand very far away from me. V'chein hu omer, and also he said, Badad yeshev michutz lamachaneh moshavo, that he shall dwell, this is about the person of Sarat, Badad yeshev, he should dwell alone, and outside of the camp is his dwelling place. Michutz lamachaneh Yisrael. It's not just that he was physically outside of the encampment of the desert, but he was outside really the people of Israel, the encampment of Israel, the community of Israel. L'chach ne'amar behuva el hakohen. Therefore it says he is brought to the Kohen, meaning almost the opposite. He's not brought. Huba, he has to come. You've got to make that journey because you were the one that caused your own excommunication. So again, we hear the syllables huva, and rather than hearing it as he is brought, no one's going to do this work for you. You've got to be the one to do it yourself. Okay? I want to now bring in a Rashi from somewhere else in the Torah before we go to source 5. It's really source 5 that was the engine of this teaching. The Rashi on source 4 is from Parshat Va'era. It happens to be some of the verses that we're studying right now in the Wednesday morning Rashi class. And it has to deal with what Moses says to Pharaoh regarding the removal of the plague of hail. And the verse is something like, I'm going to read the whole verse to you. I should have brought the whole verse. I'm sorry. If you have a Chumash in front of you, you can open it up to Exodus chapter 9. You might still have it from the Torah reading, but if not, I'll read it. Okay, so Pharaoh pleads with Moses, basically saying, as he's said several times, I'm done. You were right. I was wrong. Please plead on my behalf to God so that this punishing hail will leave. In verse 29, Vayomer Lav Moshe, Moses says to him, Kitseiti et ha'ir, when I leave the city, Efroset kapai, I'll extend my hands, El Adonai, to God. Hakolot yechdalun, all of the thunder will stop. V'habarad lo ye'od, there will be no more hail. Laman teda, so that you should know, Pharaoh, Ki Adonai ha'aretz, that all of this world belongs to God. Ve'atav adecha, and I want to say something to you, Pharaoh, you and your servants. Yadati, I know, Ki terem tir'un, you do not yet fear. It's an interesting three-word sentence, Mipnei Adonai Elohechem, from God, meaning, I'm going to do what you asked. I'm going to tell God to remove the plague, and you're going to have some relief. But I'm into you, and I know that you're not sincere yet, and I know that you're not contrite. And the only reason you're pretending to be contrite right now is why? Because you want relief from the plagues. That's natural. Any human being will do almost anything to no longer suffer in the moment. It's why in the the philosophy about how to extract information from people who have it, why there are many people who say that torture, in addition to being immoral, is unhelpful, because someone who's being tortured will say anything to have the torture being stopped, right? And it's not because they've repented. It's not because they're on your side. It's because they'll do anything to have it removed. So those three words, ki terem tir'un. I know that you are not yet at the stage that you have yira, that you have true awe for God. Look back at the Rashi, when it says atem tir'un, adayin lo tir'un. You still don't have fear. Fear in the sense of reverence for God. Bechein kol terem b'mikra. Every time the word terem is used in the Torah, it means not yet. It doesn't mean from. So look at the fourth line of the Hebrew. Terem yishkavu. This is from the story of Lot's house when people are coming into the town, and it meant that they hadn't yet lied down at night. Terem yitzmach. This is second chapter of Breshit, where the Torah is describing that there was no vegetation yet on the ground, and that's when God brought the vegetation. It means ad lo tzamach. It hadn't yet grown. Af zeh kenhu. It's similar here in this case of Moses speaking to Pharaoh. Yadati ki adayin einchem yireim. I know that you still don't really have a fear of God. Umisha tiyeh harbacha. And once you get a little bit of respite, once the hail is gone, ta'amdu bekilkulchem. You'll go right back to what you're doing, right? What I'm thinking of right now is the thing I had to do 17 times this morning during the kids' bar mitzvah drash and look over at the wonderful 7th grade freshman students whom I love, who were chattering away the entire time, and I'd give them the look of death, and they would stop. But as soon as I stopped giving them the look of death, they started again, right? They hadn't repented. They weren't reformed. They just didn't want to be stared at by a meanie rabbi, right? And by the way, we're all guilty as charged about that, right? There are many things that the reason why we don't do them is not necessarily because we have reached the place where we realize we shouldn't, but because we don't like the repercussions of doing them, right? So Moses calls out Aaron for that. Moses calls out Pharaoh for that. And how does that relate to what we've been discussing? Look at source 5, one of my favorite Hasidic commentators on the Torah. His name is the Shem Mishmuel, Rabbi Shmuel Bornstein. He was the second Sokochover Rebbe in Poland. And he bases his commentary on the first comment we read, which is Rashi. So he says, Birashi. We read this in Rashi, and we already read it. Ma taknato v'yitrapeh. What is his remedy such that he will become healed? Yashpil atzmo. He should make himself low. He asks an interesting question that Rashi did not ask. Lama ramzah haTorah takanat refuato acharei shekfar nitrapeh mitzarato. Why, at least according to Rashi, does the Torah hint at the remedy for his refuah, for his healing, in the verse that is actually about the moment after he's healed, right? If you think of the exact timing of the opening lines of the Parsha, it's not narrative, it's law. So it's talking about a situation. The person is healed. In fact, the Kohen is going to see that he's healed, and this is the way he comes back into the community. So why do we reference, according to Rashi, the process of healing if he's already healed? B'yom tarato, on the day that he's actually recovered. It seems like we're going back in procedural time. Hakavanahi, this is the intent. Shahahachna'azo, this sense of submission. Hachna'a is to submit, to surrender. When it comes to, your own self, and it can refer to surrender to a foe. It can also mean to give in to the reality of what's happening around you. This sense of recognition, shehu nichna achshav, that he is very submissive right now. Why? Mechamat nigo, because he was afflicted. That's why he's submissive. That's why you got the disease, so that you become submissive. Tisha'er bo latamid. It should stay with him forever. Afilu achar shnitrapeh. Even after he heals. What he's saying is, what the Torah is hinting at is, we don't want it to be, which is very human nature-y, that you're now feeling regret for having done Lashon Hara because you have Sara'at. You waited outside the camp for a week. Sara'at's over. All of a sudden you're healed. Do you still have regret for what you did? Is that going to change your behavior the next time? Right? So Rashi, according to him, Rashi says we link the hint at the remedy for your healing on the day that you've already healed, so that after you've healed, you can remember what it was like before you had healed. It was rotten. You suffered because you made someone else suffer. Think about that the next time, right? Is there any more common lesson that parents want to teach their children, right? If you don't like the consequence that we imposed upon you for A, B, or C, remember that next time before you do it. And none of us learn it perfectly, but it's one of the most important teachings we can do about what it means to be a person in a family and a community. The Zo Kavanat Ma'amar Ramzal, this is the intent of what our sages said in the Talmud in Menachot, page 5. Zot Tihiyeh HaTorah Metzora, this will be the Torah Metzora. What the Talmud is picking up on there is that the word Tihiyeh, will be, is not needed in Hebrew grammar. It could have been Zot Torah Metzora. This is the instruction of the Metzora. Why do we have this future of the verb to be? Bahavayata Tihiyeh. It should be, this is hard to say in English, it should be in the future what it is now. Perush, Sheyishe'er tamid b'shiflut kamo shehu achshav. That the person on the way out of the affliction should stay as humbled and as contrite and as chastened as he is now. We all need this lesson over and over again, right? To figure out how it is to stay the way we are the moment we learned a hard lesson. The past becomes the past pretty quickly. When we're no longer suffering from the thing that someone brought upon us, we brought upon ourselves, we can delude ourselves into thinking we can go right back into that behavior pattern again. And if we do, we're going to have tzara'at again. And we're going to be outside the camp again. And when we're brought back into the camp, we're going to be given a chance. Are you going to remember this time? Sometimes we will, sometimes we won't, but we know that we should. Shabbat Shalom.